Duane, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 11th Annual Albany Fall Conference. This is the GC Roundtable, promoting unity and strength through leadership. I am Duane Morikawa. I'm a co-chair of the in-house council committee, and my other co-chairs are Blossom Khan, senior counsel at MetLife, and Grace Fu, GC of Barney's of New York. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this great panel. And I wanted to particularly thank our sponsors. Broadridge, which is a well-established financial printer, is our gold level sponsor and actually a diamond sponsor for the year. The other sponsor is Con Edison, which is a silver sponsor. So we cannot do this conference without our sponsorship, and we thank them. So moving on to some housekeeping items, if you bear with me. For the CLE program, this is an Asian American Bar Association of New York, and it's a certified program by the New York State Continuing Legal Education Board as an accredited provider. This program has been approved in accordance with the requirements of the CLE board for a maximum of 1.5 credit hours, in which 1.5 credits will be applied towards the requirement of law practice management. This program is suitable for both transitional and non-transitional New York attorneys. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists.
Duane, there's more.
Oh, there's more?
There's more.
Okay. Okay, so I'm reading all of it. Francis, what part am I supposed to read? All of it?
Yeah, right after that, there's more. Yeah,
okay,
including,
so
keep
so you must
here.
have pre-registered and confirmed for this program to receive CLE credit. The first page of the written materials that were emailed to you is an attorney affirmation, which you must complete and return to cle@albany.org. There will be two codes, announced during the program to record the codes on the attorney affirmation, and please return your affirmation as soon as possible within 1 week so that we can send you your certificate. You received a link for the online evaluation for this session with the written materials. Please kindly complete the evaluation so that we can improve our programs. And with that, I think that's it. The codes will be read during the program, so please write those down. So with that, I will move to introduce our panelists. The first is Deborah P Majoras. She is legal officer and secretary of the Procter & Gamble Company. Fun fact about Deborah, she has sat on many boards, but none as fun as the one she joined last year, which is the Executive Committee of the United States Golf Association. Another fun fact, Deborah's first legal job was as a receptionist at a law firm in Washington, D.C. So she's obviously come a long ways. Our next panelist, Rena Reiss, Executive Vice President and General Counsel, Marriott International, Inc. A fun fact about Rena, she and her husband were inaugural season ticket holders of the Miami Heat, as well as inaugural subscribers to the Miami City Ballet. Our next panelist, Munson Steinis, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary, Nordstrom, Inc. Interesting fact about Anne, as class president for her 6th grade class, she presented Gordon Howe, the Canadian ice hockey player, a Lifetime Achievement Award. Our next panelist, Vanessa L. Allen Sutherland, Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer, Norfolk Southern Corporation. Fun fact about Vanessa is that she was a general manager of her college radio station. She was also a roadie at a Rolling Stones concert. Next speaker, Amy E. Weaver, President and Chief Legal Officer, Salesforce.com, Inc. Amy is married to her junior prom date. She also has 3 sons who were born in 3 different countries. Our final panelist, David Zapolsky, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of Amazon.com, Inc. Fun fact about David, he studied music in college and almost became a music professor instead of a lawyer. David still sings in non-professional classical course performances, though, when his schedule allows for it. Our moderator, Michael Wu, is the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary of Madewell, Inc. Interesting fact about Michael. Michael's parents moved from Atlanta to Saudi Arabia during his high school years, so he graduated from boarding school in Salzburg, Austria. Michael has also had 2 in-house expat assignments in Hong Kong with telecommunications companies. This is our panel. I thank Michael Wu for putting together an amazing panel, and I pass it over to Michael.
Thank you, Duane. We're just so pleased this afternoon to have our outstanding General Counsel panel from across the United States. Our General Counsel will address a wide range of topics this afternoon, including the challenges they are facing during the pandemic, diversity inclusion issues, key characteristics of an effective General Counsel, collaboration with the C-suite board and outside counsel, and working effectively with outside counsel. First, going to turn to the pandemic. Anne, can you discuss the top challenges you and your company have faced since the COVID-19 pandemic commenced in March, and how has the role of the legal department changed during these very difficult times?
Sure. Thank you, Michael, and thank you for having me. The retail sector has been particularly hard hit by the impacts of COVID, ranging from store closures to supply chain stressors and a complicated web of complying with literally thousands of state and local regulations. In terms of things that have impacted my company, Nordstrom, pretty quickly as the pandemic set in, our initial focus was on ensuring liquidity and ensuring that the company, with no cash coming in the door, because our doors were closed, how do we make sure that we have enough dollars to keep investing in the company through potentially long-term store closures. We had to quickly focus on safety issues. I'll talk a little bit more about that and the role of the legal function. And really acceleration of a lot of strategies that were already underway. We had made large-scale investments previously in our digital business, no surprise, as customers are shopping this way increasingly year over year. There was a greater pull forward of projects and investments in supply chain capabilities, including things like store fulfillment. Really important in a pandemic. What if one of your big fulfillment centers was particularly hit hard by the pandemic and couldn't operate? So store fulfillment became really key as part of a diversified supply chain network. Enhancing curbside pickup and buy online, pick up in store, concepts I know all of you are familiar with because you're shopping with a variety of retailers, including grocery stores and Target and Best Buy and Nordstrom. We had started down a path with a market strategy, which would give us the ability through some different concepts in our top markets of basically enhancing the level of service and selection provided to those customers in those top markets. Merchandise mix shift from work and special occasion to casual and athleisure and home. So one of the things that we needed to really think through was how do you get customers comfortable with shopping in stores again? How do you make a store environment that is safe and clean? How do you make sure that it's not sterile though, and a place that customers would find scary to be in because of concerns about COVID? We have a great big event every year called Anniversary. It's where we provide new merchandise, not markdown merchandise, but brand new merchandise at a discount after that event. Pricing returns to regular price. It's a big event. When you can't print catalogs because none of the printers can operate their businesses, what do? Well, you shift to a digital version. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. We wound up creating a wish list feature for customers to enhance that, what we knew was going to increasingly be a digital event versus a store-based event. So those were the kinds of things the store, the company was facing. And let me pivot for a moment to address the second part of the question is, what was the role of the legal function? All of the things that happened during COVID underscored the need for the company to move with speed and agility in decision making. And that was something that the company culture was not accustomed to. Well, the law department similarly had to very quickly pivot to speed and agility in decision making. In terms of the role, at Nordstrom, the risk management function is part of my team. And so I was fortunate that team was closely watching the events unfold in China and Europe. Seattle became ground zero with the first cases and multiple deaths in the US. Timing was such that our normal financial scenario planning was complete. So it took no convincing when I had to turn to our CFO and say, hey, I think we need to pull down our what we call a break glass plan. It's, every company has a plan if worst case scenario happens, a recession plan, if you will. I said, let's pull it down and get the teams ready. Let's start looking at the levers we're going to pull. So because of what was happening around us here in Seattle, I think we were pretty quick to react to the pandemic as it hit the States. Real quick activation with the board of directors, and then the legal function had to stand up our cross-functional crisis management team. The traditional practice areas within the department couldn't work in this environment. Again, we had to be agile, flexible. So I asked the team to think of themselves not as specialists in a hospital. So you're no longer a cardiologist, you're no longer a gastroenterologist, you're no longer a general practitioner. We're a MASH unit. Right now, we're going to jump in everywhere we need to, and we're going to quickly assess what's the most critical things that we need to deal with. And that's how we operated for a long time. And as we started to move out of the crisis mode into what is sort of a new normal, we kept those things that were good about how we had to operate at the height of the pandemic, meaning a lot of those traditional silos within the department kind of crumbled, and we like that. We like more of a SWOT approach, and we're keeping a lot of that because that gives you a lot of flexibility to look at the book of work that the department has to support the company and and focus resources and time and attention on those things that are most critical to the company's success. The crisis management team model has been used repeatedly, unfortunately this year, for other events, including civil unrest and looting, dealing with the derecho that hit the Midwest, and most recently the wildfires. Michael, I'll stop there. I'm sure that there are others who, have similar and perhaps different pieces of information to share about how their departments and their companies were reacting during COVID.
Right. Rena, I mean, similar to much of the retail industry, at least the non-essential categories, I know that the American Hotel and Lodging Association conducted a survey recently. Over the last 6 months, hotels are about 65% of capacity, or actually 65% of the hotels are 50% below 50% occupancy, which is a threshold in which hotels break even. So I'm sure you've been going through a lot of trials and tribulations over the last 6 months during the pandemic.
Yeah, and listening to Anne, I have to say, it's like, I'll see you retail and I'll up you hospitality, because we're going through many, many of the same things. I mean, if you think about what Anne and Nordstrom looks at in terms of making people feel safe, both workers in the stores and your customers, the exact same thing is going on with hotels. We need to make sure that the folks who are there feel safe. We need to make sure guests feel safe. That has obviously evolved a great deal in 6 months, 7 months. We've learned a lot about the pandemic. At the beginning, it was really all about cleaning surfaces and making sure people were visible cleaning surfaces. And I think now, as we've gone on, we've learned that transmission is more likely to be airborne. So we've moved to a requirement in the US and Canada requiring both our guests and our customers to wear masks. More popular some places than others, but we felt that that was really important. As a global business, this hit us fairly early, right after the first of the year in China, and then moved around the world. And I think, again, like Anne, you think you have, every country has its own rules and regulations, except for the US, where we can't do anything on a federal level. But you have states, you have local municipalities, you even have counties. For example, where I live in Montgomery County in Maryland, we're not on the same trajectory as the state of Maryland. The county is opening slower. So I think a lot of it was jumping in, and again, very similar, figuring out, with the aid of our government affairs people, what are the rules, are hotels essential services? And then, you sort of have everything else, again, looking at liquidity, making sure that the company is in a stable position to move forward and come out of this. Hotels are suspending operations, at least temporarily. Some of them are shut down. Some of them are taken over for first responders. Now we're finding hotels being turned over to universities to house students. A lot of employment issues as we put many of our people on furloughs and reduced work weeks. So literally every practice group in the department was kind of slammed immediately. Mm-hmm. Interesting as well, because whereas some parts of the business were clearly slowing down, obviously our occupancy numbers were pretty terrible, certainly at the beginning of this. The legal work, if anything, accelerated and certainly didn't slow down. And then I think you have the shift to remote work. Obviously, that's not at the property. You have people who are at the property and need to be there, but above property and corporate. We joke around and say, under normal circumstances, we would have studied this to death, 18 months, 40 pages of rules, you have to go through 17,000 approval levels. And we were in a situation where we said, okay, you have 48 hours and everybody's going home, and we all had to just figure it out. And we did. And I think that that flexibility is, sometimes it's a little daunting. You don't always get it right the first time. You have to be prepared to pivot and change up things. But in some ways, it teaches you that there is an agility in the organization that can be put to good use.
Great. Thank you. So the Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella sees the world through 3 stages during the pandemic: rescue, recover, and reimagine. I think we've gone through the rescue and we're in the recovery phase, hopefully. But in terms of the reimagining and opportunities with respect to the pandemic, I don't know if you have any thoughts there, Rena or Anne.
I'm happy to, yeah, I would agree. It was sort of the acute phase. Right now, we're in recovery, but given the fact that no one envisioned this going on even, 6 months, and now we're looking at when do we get what is probably going to be necessary to really recover, which is a safe, effective, and widely distributed vaccine, or we're going to have to learn how to live with this. And that poses a lot of challenges, especially in a business where we depend on long haul travel. We are really hampered by the fact, for example, in Europe, over the summer, they depend on visitors from the US. Well, that wasn't happening. So like Anne and like in the retail business, we saw our revenues just kind of plummet overnight. I think reimagining the business for us is understanding that we do think travel will return. We actually think people, both for leisure purposes and for business, yes, we can do our jobs remotely, but I also think we're finding that people really miss being together. There is a value in being with each other and getting together. You can't have 2,000 people in a ballroom right now. That's not safe, but our hotels every day are coming up with ways of making sure that they can host conferences, that they can do hybrid events. And part of it is being able, even if people are wearing masks and gloves and sanitizing their hands all the time, how do you make sure people feel welcome in a world where we can no longer shake somebody's hand or give somebody a hug?
Great, thank you, Rena.
Yeah, Michael, and I'll just chime in. Yes, we definitely are working on the reimagine part and all kinds of things and initiatives underway to enhance and enable digital selling and virtual selling and experiences, believe it or not. I won't go into too much detail because I'll ruin the surprise for all of you, but some very cool things. And that has been, I think, a lot of fun, if you will, out of the bad of COVID, is really being completely free to knock down all of those perceived barriers and saying, you know what, why not? It's no longer, oh, we can't because, it's, well, why not? And let's go for it. So yes, a lot of that going on.
Thank you. I know Debbie's looking forward to the surprises ahead from Nordstrom since she's a big customer.
Yes.
All right, Debbie, I know that many of your workers are essential workers, so they continue to work through the pandemic. But in terms of corporate headquarters and other facilities, how has your company been planning and implementing re-entry into the workforce?
Yeah, as Rena mentioned, a lot of the planning is really inherently local. And there's really just a few things that we've really thought about more from a global basis. First is making it really clear constantly and repeating it over and over that our first priority is to protect the health and safety of all of our employees. Mm-hmm. Second, that flexibility is the name of the game. You know, it's part of it is, as Anne and Rena really talked about, we're making it up as we go, but it's also just understanding that employees need some flexibility during this time to manage our lives. It's every part of everyone's life. And third, to make sure that we share learnings across the globe. Anne mentioned China, and of course we have a massive business in China, and so we were able to really learn some things there about how to cope with this, and then as it moved across the world, we've adopted those learnings. And the considerations differ, as Rena said, not only by country, but by state, by province, even counties. So, but everybody's really got to take into account the same considerations, I think. Externally, it's the government rules, the virus trends that are happening in your area, what's transportation looking like as a result, what about the schools? And then internally, the ability in each and every facility to take the right safety measures, which we had to put in place, And then what are employees' roles? You know, governments assigned what was essential, but how are we looking at employees' roles and where their workplace needs to be? So, you know, for us, well, our first priority was and is the safety of our employees. Second was make, pack, and ship as fast as we can, because as you know, we make a lot of soap, both for personal use. We make cleaning products, and yes, we make toilet paper, which everybody was hoarding. And so, you know, for our manufacturing and distribution employees, working from home has never been an option. And so it was really critical for us. And I have government relations also in my portfolio, and we just had to go government by government, no matter how local, and very quickly convince them that we are essential and you don't want us to stop making these things for your people. Like, and they agreed, and we were really very successful, I'm happy to say, in keeping things up and running. So very early on, starting in China, we established very strict safety and cleaning measures, which today, you know, 9 months later, they're very familiar to everyone, right? Temperature checks, wearing masks, social distancing, rearranging the internal workplace so that social distancing is possible, and so on. But there wasn't a playbook before, right? We have it now, and we've used that. And then in many countries, we were organizing transportation to get employees to the plants. We were some were even staying in dorms to be in a bit of a bubble.
Playbook, do you think that, given your experience in China, when the pandemic hit the United States, that you were better prepared than many companies like mine because you sort of had somewhat of a playbook already from China?
Yeah, and I don't want to say that we were better prepared, but we certainly, I think, felt pretty prepared. And because, you know, take for example, in the state of Ohio, Governor Duane was pretty much out in front in some of the in some of the shutting down and thinking this through. And so immediately our CEO started to work with the governor and with others across the state to say, hey, it's not necessary for everything to stay shut down. Here are ways to actually cope with this. And so I think, you know, it was good that we were able to call on that experience, not only for ourselves, but to share that with others. So I think that was a big help. Right. And so as we started bringing people back into offices, you know, the safety protocols would apply, and we started phasing people in. In headquarters in Cincinnati, we were really going to be phasing in over the course of the summer to the point where we would have 40% of the people in each week alternating, so really up to 80. And then we had a surge in Hamilton County here, and we said, hey, wait a minute, let's call timeout. We believe we are perfectly safe in the office. In fact, we had employees saying, I feel safer here than I feel anywhere. but nonetheless, you know, you look clueless if you're telling everybody to come back to work when people are fearful and people are thinking what's going on. And so anyway, we put a stop on that, and it's really at the moment very voluntary and very flexible as we move forward. And like everyone else, I think we're going to be reevaluating at the end of the calendar year. I keep sort of smiling to myself and saying, hey, wait a minute. I mean, I don't think this virus is going to go with our calendar, but it's a convenient stopping point for all of us. And I guess last thing I would say is the challenge now. I see two really primary challenges for us now. One is employee mental health. It cannot be overstated that this has become a very difficult issue, and one that we have to pay attention to. I had a global webcast yesterday with my whole global team, and we spent half of our time with Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington's group, coming in and talking about dealing with the stress and so on and so forth, which was very much appreciated. So that's something that I think all leaders really need to be taking into account and helping people to cope. And then the second thing, of course, is really something that Anne and Rena started us on, which is, you know, what's this going to look like going forward? You know, I've got people saying, look, I don't ever need to come back to the office because I've proven it. I can do everything I need to do from home. But of course, what people need to, not everybody feels that way, but what people need to recognize is, one, that's because we've built all these relationships over the years and we know each other, right? That's a big advantage. But think about our new hires who've just come in and they haven't even seen most of us in the office yet. I think the challenge for all of us coming back is going to be, it will not look the same. It won't. I genuinely believe that. But what will it look like, and how will we preserve the wonderful face-to-face interactions that's sort of the magic of teams innovating and working together, while still giving people this flexibility. And that's what we're working on to determine right now for the medium and long term.
That's a very good point, Debbie. Vanessa and I were at a GC happy hour last night, virtual happy hour, with the new General Counsel Bed Bath & Beyond. And I think something like 6 or 7 of the executives were appointed after the pandemic had commenced. So
Yeah.
they had not met each other in person until maybe a few weeks ago. So I think those personal connections are so important, and it's not so easy for new employees to get integrated when everyone's in a virtual environment.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We all have to remember that. So,
David, well, I get Amazon packages multiple times a week, even more so than before the pandemic, and would like your thoughts just with respect to your experience at Amazon.
Well, I bet you everybody on this panel could write an entire book on what it's been like to go through this. It's hit everybody, every industry differently, and we've all had unique challenges. And I echo kind of the wisdom from the other panelists as to how we've all dealt with it. For us, we were suddenly dealing with a spike in demand and a stress on all of our systems that we usually plan years for. It's like Black Friday tomorrow with no warning. And so, we realized quickly we were going to be essential in most areas of the world. People were going to rely on us. And I'll just start out by saying I think this has been the hardest 8 months of my career at Amazon, and I've been here 21 years. It is, we had to pivot quickly to reinvent all of our systems to prioritize essential products and deliveries. But first and foremost, to make our people safe, because we knew that, and we had lawyers literally around the world meeting every day with regulators, explaining, how we could operate and how we should operate to continue supplying our customers. And, but reinventing the whole company to make our frontline employees safe was, the first jobs, priorities 1, 2, and 3 through 10. And
watch your commercials every night on CNN in terms of safety with respect to your supply chain for your employees.
And there's a lot of hard challenges, down to, I think, as we look, so, I won't cover all the ground, but as we look forward, I wish I could be more optimistic about the pace at which we're going to return to normal. I think the mental health point that Deborah made was super important. I think there's going to be a lot of disappointments in the next 4 months, really big disappointments. I think we're going to see setbacks in this fight against the pandemic that a lot of people don't expect. And we have to be prepared for that. And, I think one of the things that we're doing to differentiate ourselves, and that has taken, hundreds of millions of dollars and lots of lawyer time, is we're figuring out how to test, all 1 million of our employees on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We're testing several tens of thousands weekly now, and we're going to keep ramping that up over the course of the fall. Because I think ultimately we need a vaccine, but that's not going to happen for some period of months, hopefully, optimistically. And in the meantime, we need universal testing in order to operate safely. And so I think there's going to be a lot. And then beyond that, we're in terms of office work and whatnot, I think we're having those discussions now. The only other thing I'd add to the great thoughts that people have said already is that new people is a tremendous challenge, and we're hiring tons of people, obviously, based on the demand that we're facing. But it's also a real headwind on inclusivity. How do you have an inclusive workplace when people can't even be with each other? It's an extra, makes it extra difficult to deal with, the inclusive part of, diverse and inclusive environments. And I'm anxious to hear what others are doing, because I don't have a great set of solutions yet. I think we've all had, all of the Zoom cocktails that we can, stand. They're fun for a while, but I think we've also all had the experience of actually being in person with people again, and understood how different, how important, and how nourishing that can be to your mental health. And so I think that's our big challenge in the next, 6 months.
Great. All right, thank you, David. That's a good segue to our next topic, which is diversity and inclusion. All right, Rena, many people see 2020 events, including the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, as a tipping point. What challenges and opportunities for diversity and inclusion efforts are presented by the BLM movement, and how do you foresee the current events impacting diversity and inclusion efforts at Marriott? And I know Marriott is, on the forefront of diversity and inclusion, and one of the first companies that established a board of directors committee focused on advancing diversity and inclusion, about 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think David is right. Right now we're facing a multiplicity of crises almost. It's just one thing layered on another. And I think for me personally, it has been a recognition of how the events of the summer after the killing of George Floyd have impacted our colleagues. And I've had people say to me, and I'm sure you all have heard this, I can't just, sort of show up for another Zoom call and make believe that I'm going merrily along and that it's not impacting me. And I think that what we've done is try to carve out the time and the commitment to have uncomfortable conversations about things that frankly have not necessarily been polite to talk about in the workplace. People step very, very gingerly around these issues. But I think one way of getting into it, it starts with just a how are you doing? And it doesn't matter what color anybody is or what background they're coming from. A lot of it just has to do with really listening to people and meeting them where they're showing up. And I think that has been, it's been amazing. I sent a note out to my team. It was the Sunday night after George Floyd was killed. And I had several people come back to me with very personal communications, and we sort of started this dialogue over the summer, all over Teams, of course, or Zoom. But it was really incredible, and people bearing their souls a little bit, telling very personal stories about what they were going through. I'm finding that those conversations are often easier in smaller groups, although we do have sort of big company-wide town halls. So I'm really proud of what the company is doing, what our history is, but I think we're also realizing, you know what, we've got to do more. So the board committee that you mentioned, which was founded about 20 years ago, we've actually just changed the name of the committee, and it's the Inclusion and Social Impact Committee. And it's board members working with members of management to really dig into statistics and say, what is it that we can really do to advance the cause of inclusion in the company and inclusive opportunity. Our hiring numbers at sort of junior and entry-level jobs are great, and people fall out of the system. Why is that? How can we change that? I think there is an argument, we've all heard it, that inclusion is an economic issue, but I also think that we're all finally acknowledging that confronting issues of racial and social justice, it's a moral issue. We have a lot of work to do in this company. And the more, if I can say to the folks on my team, I'm troubled by what happened in Louisville with the indictment. And, we have a lot of work to do. And, let's just start it with what feels comfortable to you guys and what you want to do. So I think the other challenge that we face is that Black Lives Matter is obviously very much on the radar screen of my team in the US, but I have a team throughout the world. And how do you sort of translate that to people around the world who live in different cultures? There are different levels of understanding of what's going on. Again, I think so much of it is just a willingness to have open conversations and to listen to one another. And I think fundamentally one of our challenges is to help people understand by saying that we're looking at increasing opportunities for some people doesn't mean we're foreclosing opportunities for other people. I think sometimes there's this feeling like it's a zero-sum game, and if somebody is getting something, I'm losing something. and really to help people understand this is where all boats rise, and this is an expanding pie. So very challenging to put it into practice, especially when we're in a situation where our business is, you know, under a severe amount of stress. But you got to try.
Right. And Amy, I'm sure you have some thoughts as well, since Salesforce as a company has been on the forefront of diversity and inclusion issues.
So it's great to jump in. And first, I just have to say, I love the fun facts. I've known David for at least a decade. I had no idea about this music background. And Michael, I started my career working for the Hong Kong legislature. So at some point, we'll have to compare Hong Kong notes on
Yes.
that. The other thing I wanted to mention before jumping in on this, I was really struck by the comments from Rena and also from Anne on the kind of the mental wear and tear of this year, which is both from the pandemic, from so much about what's going on in this struggle for racial justice, and just how long this is going on. And the best quote I heard is somebody told me the other day, they said they felt like they had gone out for a 1 mile run and realized they were in a marathon, because it's just going on and on and on. So I think that, you know, the amount of time I spend dealing with kind of just mental health and trying to keep people motivated is just a huge portion of my job that wasn't there necessarily 8 months ago. Now, on the D&I front, one of the questions when it originally came in was, you know, why are corporations ahead of law firms on D&I? And my first thought was, you know, I don't think either of us should be taking a bow on this. This is not, no one should be real proud of where we are. I think both corporations and law firms are making progress, but there is a long ways to go. And it's been a huge focus at Salesforce, but we have not cracked the code on this. And we have a lot to do in this area. I think one area where we were really ahead on was gender pay, and looking at what we could be doing there. And 5 years ago, how that came about is two women went to our CEO and said, we're not sure, but we think we could have an issue. And I think his attitude was, are you kidding? We're always ahead on these issues. Great values, we're fine. Didn't hear anything more. 3 weeks later, he gave a interview with a reporter and said, hey, and by the way, we're gonna do a big study at Salesforce. And we're going to announce the results publicly, and we're going to pay to make up any difference. And I'll tell you, it was one of those moments, like as a woman, I'm like, that's great. And as general counsel, I'm like, oh, I don't think this is a very good idea. And it was terrifying because we had no idea what we were going to find. So sure enough, we went through the study. We weren't perfect. We had to pay out $3 million that year. We also realized you can't do that one time and think you've corrected the problem. So we came back the next year, and we also broadened this to make sure we were looking at race, at least in the United States where that can be tracked. And we had to pay out another $3 million in our second year of doing that. This has gone on and on. Each year, the amounts have gotten smaller, but we've had to pay out more than, I think we're up to $11 or $12 million over the last few years. And we're determined to keep doing it. But one thing that was interesting to me is about 3 years ago, I spoke on a panel nationally on the gender and racial pay equity. And it was for a conference on women in the law. And I probably had 12 partners from major law firms come up to me and say, yeah, we can't do that. And I said, well, why not? I said, you don't have to be public. I said, just, you know, take a look and figure it out. And they said, we don't even want to know what's under the cushions. This is such an issue with law firms. It is so intractable, and it's so difficult because of the model of rainmaking, of billable hours, and they're like, we just don't even know where to start. Now, I think everyone's come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years, but there has been some ground that needed to be made up in that area. The last thing I would say on that is, I think the real key on D&I for law firms and corporations is not to compare each other, but to see if we can work together and how we can come together on that. And one terrific initiative that I just have to plug is something called Diversity Labs. And this is a great group. They have been terrific in creating the program called On-Ramp, which brings mostly women who have been out of the workforce for 6-7 years back in to different positions. But they also have partnered up with 4 law firms to see if they can really meaningfully move the needle on diversity. They are are Stoll Reeves, Oric, Nixon Peabody, and Eversheds. And these 4 firms have been willing to publicly go out with some pretty much moonshot numbers and be held to that. And in collaboration, the corporations, we've agreed to work with them and come up with ways that we can support, whether it's through additional work with them, whether it's through secondments and other areas. So I think that's where we need to really focus, is how do we get these 2 groups to work together and collectively move this forward in law.
Great, thank you, Amy. Vanessa, what are your thoughts just in general on the opportunities for D&I with respect to BLM, and then how do you foresee these current events affecting your company in particular as well? Because I know that the diversity, you have a very robust webpage on D&I, Norfolk Southern, and it seems that there's been progress at your company even before this year, obviously significant progress.
I think Amy eloquently started to lay out where some of the partnership issues are, but it was really important to us before BLM and before George Floyd. I will start with the obvious, that the legal profession and our CFO and I have talked about this. He feels the same way in the finance world. They're one of the last bastions of diversity moving at less than a snail's pace, if that's even possible. And while there's a lot of activity and a lot of conferences and a lot of talking and lots of, I think, genuine interest, the activity and the actions haven't led to tangible outcomes. And so you have to ask, what is the busy work? And so our CEO was actually the first to sign on to a diversity pledge in our industry a few years ago. We do have a robust diversity council internally, which is buttressed by employee resource groups, but we also forced executive sponsorship of those groups because we didn't want this to be seen as, well, the employees are getting together and talking about their issues. It's a company issue. And so that sponsorship and the cross-functionality and interdisciplinary approach, I think, has helped us focus on how we now amplify some of that post-George Floyd in the wake of BLM, rather than how do we get started. From my perspective, the area over which I exert the most control is obviously with the law firms and my legal vendors. And every now and then we get lucky enough to work on a contract where we can exert our control through another department. But generally speaking, it's really just us. And for our company, it's always been an imperative because we're sued all over the country. We're a railroad. We have 19,500 miles of track. We have terminals, ports, labor, non-labor, and we are spread out in order to move freight from origin to destination. So we wanted our outside counsel always to reflect the communities in which they serve. We wanted our outside counsel to be reflective of the specific social, economic, educational, political issues in our areas to help us with community economic development and public-private partnerships that are a core part of what we do. You can't do that when everybody looks and thinks the same way. So there's a creativity and innovation that we wanted them to bring, not just to the litigation and being able to reflect the communities, but in driving development and business in our communities. Our board also was very focused on that the expectation is that the suppliers with whom we work, including outside counsel, would reflect our values, would reflect our focus on diversity, and actually hold them accountable for that. For me, I thought it was great to have those values be extended to our suppliers, but I had a dual purpose in why that was important. I think we can all agree that for 25 years, it's been diversity and inclusion has been framed as it's the right thing to do. You want people to feel included. And then it sort of evolved into it's an economic imperative. For me, as a lawyer, it has an additional, maybe a tertiary view, which is there's a pipeline issue of succession and a risk management of my workload that I think goes under discussed or underappreciated. And that is, we've had lots of lawyers and associates at our firms leave abruptly. That's disruptive. Mm-hmm. And some of them have said, I left because this just was not an environment in which I felt I was going to be supported, succeed, et cetera. And so we're scrambling, we're spending time to get other people up to speed on work. And that's sort of a root of one of the issues of its retention, yes. but it's really the experience that these law firm associates are having potentially does have an impact on their ability to perform well and do great work. And I see it also as if they're being groomed there and the firm has to reduce size, shape, practice groups. That's a great succession plan for me if they have a diverse pool from which I can pull for hiring when I have an in-house opening. And there's a reciprocity there that I think, in a broad sense, Amy was describing that partnership and reciprocity, but I also see this as a reciprocal succession planning, mutual growth, and risk mitigation of the matters on which we must partner by making sure they're doing what is right and what is equitable. You asked me, Michael, I think, how do we monitor that, if at all? And I will say our outside counsel guidelines very explicitly tell our firms that we will review their diversity and inclusion in a number of ways. We look at firm profiles and trend reports. We look at matter staffing. We look at recruitment and retention, promotion, succession planning. We look at billable hours. We look at the firm more generally, and we say in our outside counsel guidelines that we look favorably on law firms or the lawyers in them who provide pro bono legal services and demonstrate a strong and visible commitment to the community, particularly underserved communities. So we do talk to them about their hours, their programs, their pro bono efforts in general, how they might be supporting even financially legal aid and others. And then we track in face-to-face, now teams to teams, conversations about what are they seeing as challenges in their firms for diversity and inclusion efforts? What are they seeing from a succession planning challenge so that we can brainstorm? We expect them to have pretty candid insights about where their challenges might be. And we also are very candid in our expectations that the firm will progress in those areas, maybe not quarter over quarter, but certainly annually, we would expect to see some level of growth. Whether that's the type of outreach they're doing, broadening their recruitment, conducting their own internal pulse surveys as we do internally to my company to find out, well, are people feeling like as though they can challenge the status quo? And we use those employee surveys or pulse surveys to track our morale and how people are feeling in those specific areas. And we ask the firms to try to do something similar. It doesn't have to be as robust as a Survey Monkey or something in that vein, but we want to see that they are taking it seriously. And I'll close by saying, we've talked about how important that dialogue is. I think our company is different in the sense that we extend the dialogue to action. And we've rebid and done RFPs this year when we felt that the firms were not being intentional or proactive in demonstrating a commitment to diversity through their staffing of our matters and through the staffing of their firms. And so we have a handful of new firms that we've acquired during the pandemic who reflect a more intentional and broad perspective on diversity. We'll see how that goes. We'll continue to track. But we're mindful of balancing the long-term relationships and working with firms to help, keep that relationship along and alive and to share our best practices and benchmark. But when we've hit a wall, because year after year we haven't seen any progress, we've RFP'd and gone to firms that look like and feel like they're really more in sync with our corporate values, our board expectations, and what our employees and customers are expecting of us as well.
And I know you've established a legal ops team at Norfolk Southern. Do you use a legal ops team to help you, use the data to measure your law firms in terms of their D&I efforts?
We do. The legal ops team, they're phenomenal. I tell them they're my Michael Phelps team. Everybody on it is Michael Phelps. And so they have developed very easy, short Survey Monkey, very manageable surveys where they can just check in with the firms periodically. We have a longer survey of how our internal lawyers believe their matters are being staffed. Do they look like they're diverse? Do they reflect America and the world? Have they gotten diverse perspectives and creative approaches to litigation? The legal ops team will keep a record for us of with whom we've had conversations face to face so that we don't miss anybody. We have a record of how many of those firms have been responsive on their own succession planning, and not just from a diversity perspective, but just in keeping themselves focused on succession planning, particularly given the breadth of work that we give a lot of these firms. Because we're a railroad, we have 75, 100-year, 105-year relationships with some of the firms. And so if the one person who's been working on our matters for literally 50 years decides to retire tomorrow, we have had some real risk conversations about what are you doing, not just for succession planning, but to try to diversify your portfolio and the people who are familiar with the work internally, because we have some single points of failure in that regard. So the legal ops team is really critical, Michael, in helping us track that, and in helping us just go out and do additional benchmarking and finding out what our peers, not just in the railroad industry, but our fellow corporate peers are doing, and innovative ideas that they're using to help build the relationship reciprocally between our company and the firms that we use.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. Just a question to the whole panel, because this came in through our Zoom chat, and I think this question, given that we are at an Asian American Bar Association, what are the thoughts of the panelists in your companies in treating Asian Americans as minorities, and are there opportunities at your companies in terms of advancement for Asian Americans, since many times you're reading about Asian Americans being the model minority that they don't really need any assistance, and then when you actually dig in and look at the numbers at law firms in terms of Asian Americans making partner, or Asian Americans serving on board of directors or as senior executive companies, the numbers are not favorable for Asian Americans.
Michael, I'll respond. We do view Asians as minorities at Nordstrom. Being in Seattle has its advantages in terms of recruiting. Certainly, the efforts most recently are definitely skewed towards Blacks in the workplace. Uniquely, perhaps, maybe not, are what most people would refer to their C-suite. There are 2 Asians in our C-suite. We have no Asians on our board. We do have 3 Black women who serve on our board. But your observation is accurate in that you find, I think, in many companies, concentrations of Asians in tech and certain fields, engineering, accounting, somewhat. And there is, I think, across most companies, kind of a fall off of advancement of Asians, like you see with Hispanics and like you see with Black Americans. And it certainly is on the overall radar screen at the company, at my company, in terms of diversity and inclusion, and many of the things that are being done in the company to focus on African Americans and Blacks in the workplace. Some of those same things, I think, will help Asians, Hispanics, and others. So I think I've answered, kind of the question, do we think about it? We also have, I'm sure other companies do too, employee resource groups, and they're very active. Our Asian-focused employee resource group is very active, and so is our Black Employee Network, and I applaud those resource groups, because I find that sometimes having those resource groups available to people can help people in support and network and opportunities, and giving career advice to one another that can be invaluable. So I encourage all of you who may be from companies to to be supportive of those efforts as well.
Hey, Michael, it's Debbie. I'd love to jump in and build on what Ann has said. Look, we too have an affinity team for our Asia Pacific employees in the US. We obviously have a massive business in Asia. So this is focused on US minorities, where we have several affinity teams. And I agree. I think that one of the things that the affinity teams do for all of us is they bring to light for all of us unique challenges that that particular group might have. So for example, as the pandemic began, our CEO met with our Asia Pacific ethnic employees in the US and, you know, re-emphasized to them that we will not tolerate any discrimination, you know, any anti-Chinese or other anti-Asian discrimination in our company, reassured them of that. And so but the one thing I will say about all of this in D&I, and we've just as a company rolled out an overall new diversity and inclusion strategy. And Ann's right that you know, in this moment, clearly there is a very strong focus on what our Black employees are going through, the search for racial justice. It's a very unique history in our country and one we have to be very focused on. But the thing that I try to really work on, and I have been the executive sponsor for an affinity team for years, actually it's our LGBTQ. But one of the things that I really stress with our chief diversity officer and our CEO and others is this is about inclusion. So we need to use the affinity teams and the groups for where it can really be valuable for unique challenges that groups are going through. And we do track our targets on whether we're you know, succeeding in getting the necessary diversity we need. But this can't become this siloed, so many of these and so many of those, and affinity teams say, you know, starting to say, well, why are you spending resources on this or focused on that? I mean, this has to be, we have to come together. This is about inclusion generally, and this is about any group that could be disenfranchised within our company. And so I am very, very keen on stressing that we're in this together. And you know, frankly, we're all diminished by inequality, every one of us. So it doesn't matter your background, your ethnicity. This is something that we all have to take personal accountability for, and not just because for a while I felt like P&G was just so focused on the affinity teams. It was like our whole D&I program. That's what it was. But that's necessarily siloed, and so we had to bring that all together. And I think we're doing a better job of that now.
That's great. And I think that, you know, affinity teams also are helpful in terms of educating. I think a lot of my friends were not even aware, for example, that, or colleagues, of the discrimination Asian Americans are facing across the United States. It's like every week I read another article or a video of an Asian American getting assaulted, from an 89-year-old grandmother lit on fire in Brooklyn to a pregnant lady getting punched in the face in Philadelphia. And in our affinity groups here at my company, I've explained, you know, to some of my colleagues all the discrimination we're facing in light of the pandemic. All right, now we're going to turn to career advice. So Debbie, the GC role is not limited to just that of trusted legal advisor, but the position also requires that you're a business partner to your board and the fellow members of your C-suite. Can you talk about when in your career you developed this mindset and what it looks like at your company during this pandemic?
You know, it's a funny thing developing a mindset, because I think while you're doing it, you have no idea that you're doing it. And it's only when you look back. So when you had given me this question, I did look back and started to think about it. And, you know, I've done law firm, I've done government service and in-house. And really, I think looking back, it did begin when I was an associate at Jones Day, and for really a couple of things that I can attribute to. One is I had a tremendous mentor, a very senior partner in antitrust, which was my field then, who was just, you know, there was a reason he was so successful. He was just such a great client service partner. And why? Because he didn't just give legal answers. He really thought through things holistically and really became that kind of really trusted business advisor in many ways. And I got to witness that and watched him giving really practical solutions, understanding that everything has risk, right? So you can't, as a lawyer, just be completely risk averse and try to tell a client, you're not going to take any risk. That's crazy. Everything has risk, but really, and, you know, really kind of laying that out and then saying what he thought. And probably everyone on this panel can agree with me. There's nothing worse than if you have an outside counsel that in the end says, well, you could do this or you could do this, and then doesn't tell you what they think. Drives me insane. Like, I will make the decision, but I'm paying you for your opinion. So I think that was super helpful. Second, from an early phase in the firm, I really wanted to be part of the law firm and its functioning. You know, sometimes, you know, people go to a law firm and you hear them say things like, well, the law firm does this or does that to us. And I always say to young lawyers, I mean, why would you want to let anyone do anything to you, right? You're part of it. Like, you know, be part of it as much as you can. And I think I had people who helped role model that for me. And so I really got involved in the firm. And so started to think, by the time I made partner, about the business of law and not just the practice of law. And those two things intersect, but they're not exactly the same. And then as I went into senior leadership positions at DOJ and FTC, you know, that's where it really started, not only because I had to run organizations, which that'll get you in a business mindset in a hurry, but also, one, because you are constantly assessing risk holistically, right? You know, as I used to tell the teams, we're not a pure legal organization. We have to think about every enforcement decision, every policy decision. What's the impact going to be in the real world? And that was, I think, some very good training in thinking that through, because lots of legislation and policy and so forth is well intended. I hope it's all well intended, right? But then you've got to think through the unintended consequences, and so that was, you know, that was a good lesson. And I guess the final thing I'll say on that in terms of these learnings is, you know, in government, I learned a super important lesson that's really, really helpful to being a good partner now. And that is that those who oversee you, so at that point it was, you know, Congress, the White House, now it's the board and the CEO, as well as your peers, can handle almost anything except surprise. So never surprise them, right? I see nods. Keep them informed about what's going on, because when people are surprised, they do not react well, and they direct their anger toward the one who had to deliver the news. So really and truly, don't surprise people. So just very quickly, what does that look like now? You know, I think some of the other panelists have really talked about what things have been like in this time. I really like what both Ann and Rena said about, you know, it's like suddenly job descriptions and silos that we've put ourselves in when we've become too complex as companies and as departments really evaporates, because we all are jumping in so quickly to solve problems. And that was really that's really what this has been like since February, March, in all of the issues, you know, that we've all been facing. And I think the key has been that we have built these partnerships with our business over time. And that is just absolutely key, because what you want in these moments is for people to want you in the room to solve the problem, not to think, do we need legal? Do we have to have legal? Do we have to have Debbie, right? No, what you want are people thinking, not even like role by role, but just saying, we're in this mode. Who do we need? And it's like, okay, it's Mark, it's John, it's Debbie, it's, you know what I mean? And we get together and solve it. Now, it helps that we've been in many foxholes together with activist shareholders and all kinds of other things up until now, but building that relationship, and so that people do see you not as the person who's there to audit you or tell you yes or no, but the person who's on the team to help with those solutions, so that you don't get to the end and say, Debbie, yes or no, is this going to fly? It's we've come up with good solutions all the way through. I might not have even had to mention one word technically about the law. We've just built this together, and that, I think, is the best way that you want it to be. And we've had some good examples in these months about that we're proud of, as well as some learnings that we can take with us going forward.
Yeah, Debbie, can I just jump in on those? I just have to laugh when you talk about, like, you know, what are the qualifications and what you need to do. And I remember, this is probably, 15, 20 years ago, a headhunter approached me on a GC job, and he sent me the job description. I printed it out. It was literally 3 pages, single space of all of the relevant work experience you were supposed to have. So instead of throwing it out, being the dutiful student, I printed it out, I put it on my desk, and for the next few years, like I would check it off every time I got like some new experience. And I just laugh when I look at 2020. None of those things have been relevant. The 2 things that have been relevant is one being a really quick study and the ability to make decisions.
Yes.
Because every single day, at the end of the day, you're making judgment calls. And you're making judgment calls in areas where you do not have the expertise. Everyone on your team is going to know more than you do. You don't have all the facts. And this year, you have no idea what's coming next. But they can't wait for the decision and you have to make it. And I think that's by far the most important skill of a general counsel.
Yeah, well said. And when I left the Justice Department, an economist, one of the leading economists from the department, Antitrust Division, came to me, and economists can be very blunt, and he was very funny. He said, "Gosh, I was just really getting to enjoy working with you." But he also said this. He said, "Here are the 2 things that you should take with you that really are effective. One, that you listen to all viewpoints, but then 2, you quickly make a decision. Because everybody can handle the decision. What they can't handle is the constant spinning and waiting for you as the leader to make the decision." So it's right on.
All right, David, what's the most valuable advice you've received in your career? Sorry, David, you're on mute.
Great question. Thank you. I want to just, +1 on everything Amy and Deborah just said about how to think about yourself as an internal lawyer. What I tell people, our version of that is, and I tell this to people when I'm interviewing them, like if you're at Amazon and you're part of a business team, we want you to think of yourself as part of a business team. You co-own the business. And if you're in a meeting where the team decides to do something that you think is really bad for customers, but is absolutely legal and has no regulatory issues, you're in trouble if you don't say anything. Like, you can't really succeed here unless you raise your hand and argue for the customer, even though it has nothing to do with your legal job. And when you have a culture like that, and you're successful at that, then it isn't too long until that's what the institution expects of you. That's what management expects from its lawyers. They want you at the table. So just echoing what you guys said, I have 3 pieces of advice I've gotten that have really mattered, and one is from my boss Jeff Bezos, who basically said, at Amazon, I really want all the lawyers to be business people first and lawyers second, which is a way of articulating kind of the same concept that Deborah brought up. So I've taken that to heart. He also gave the same advice to my predecessor. And it's the way we aspire to practice here. 2 other great pieces of advice I've gotten. One from an early mentor when I was practicing law in a New York law firm, who showed me both by telling me and through his actions that the most important thing about being a lawyer and an advocate is preserving your own personal credibility with whoever you're dealing with. Even if you have clients who may not be able to do that, your own personal credibility is what makes you effective, and it makes you a better person, actually. This was in a white collar context. So, when you're talking to a law enforcement official as a defense attorney, it's more important that you preserve your own credibility as you zealously represent your client than it is to take a shortcut and sacrifice your own credibility in pursuit of an outcome for a client. And then the other thing, very practical advice that I got from my predecessor, Michelle Wilson, as general counsel at Amazon, she just gave me 2 pieces of advice that I'll never forget. She said, first of all, don't freak out. Everybody in the room is relying on you to stay calm. Things may be going off the rails, maybe crazy. Your job is to stay calm, which is great advice. And the second piece of advice, which I think becomes more important as you become more senior, a manager in your organization, is if you touch it, you own it. And it's, I didn't really understand that advice for a couple of years until I got into this job. But what it really means is, you know, in order for your teams to be successful, they need to be empowered to make decisions about things they know about. And if you get involved over the top in a way that they haven't asked for, you know, it's on you, and they will back away, and that will only increase the burden on you when you could have empowered your team to deal with the problem. And so I think that's tactically something I think about a lot when I decide what should I inspect in the organization, or how should I get involved. And I rely on my team a lot to guide me in terms of how they can tell me how I can be most useful in confronting the problems that they're facing with.
Thank you, David. So Amy, we have lots of law students in the audience, as well as aspiring general counsel. What's your advice in terms of how they can best prepare themselves or position themselves for a public company general counsel position?
Well, I think the first thing I did is don't follow the advice I got before and print out the list of check the box. There are a million different ways to a GC job. I think each one of us on this panel today came through a different path. You know, 20, 30 years ago, I think it was most common that you probably were in a law firm for a set number of years. You had a client who you became close to, and you jumped over and took that over. I think like 1990s, 2000s, the idea is they were scooping up securities lawyers who could work with the board and do SEC filings and keep going. Today, general counsel are coming from everywhere. They're coming from government, they're coming from litigation, they're coming from corporate areas, they're coming from patent law. Don't worry too much about that path, but look for the opportunities. And one of the things I would really say is, if you have an opportunity, look, opportunities never, ever, ever come up at the right time. I have not had one convenient job opportunity. Every time I have a job opportunity come up, I have either just bought a house and it requires a relocation. I'm remodeling something. I'm extra busy with some personal commitment, or in several cases, I've been pregnant. So the stars are not going to align. And you're going to have to stop waiting for them to take that job or try the new opportunity. And my very favorite quote is from a man named William Coffin, and he was the chaplain at Yale University. This is back in like the 1940s or 1950s. But he said, I love leaps of faith. First you jump and then you grow wings. So if you're looking to try to do something, push yourself to find the opportunity. Don't wait for the exact right moment, and just have the faith that it's going to come together and you're going to grow those wings.
Great advice. Well, Rena, you've served as general counsel of 2 public companies. Anything else to add there?
I love that. I'm writing it down. First you jump, then you grow wings. I think that's right. You know, the fact of the matter is, my first GC job was absolutely terrifying. People would come into my office and ask a question, and I'd look around and I think, why are you asking me? I have absolutely no idea. So one of the things you learn is you really are not expected to know all the answers, but you are expected to know how to figure them out. To the point that was made before, you know, you're going to rely on your team, and you need a great give and take with those people. They need to be sounding boards. They need to also tell you when they think that you're sort of misthinking something. And then you need to get out of their way and let them do their job. And I think that's a big part of it. I also think you're going to be, to some extent, a business person with some legal expertise, as opposed to a lawyer who happens to be in a company. And I think the point that was made before about making decisions is absolutely critical. You know, you're not going to have all the information. In fact, most of the time you won't have all of the information. So you're going to rely on your gut, your judgment, your experience, the wisdom of other people that you work with. And you're going, and this is hard for me because I never like to make mistakes, but you know, sometimes you're going to be wrong and you're going to have to change course. And you know what? So far, the world has kept turning every time. But you know, not making a decision is making a decision. And I just think that is something we learn almost as young lawyers to sort of do that on the one hand, on the other hand, on the third hand. And to Amy's point before, you actually want somebody to step in and give you a recommendation. And I think that's what our peers, that's what our bosses, that's what our boards look for. You have to get comfortable with that.
Great. Thank you, Rena. And what challenges have you observed for diverse candidates seeking executive level positions, and what recommendations do you have for them to overcome those challenges?
I've seen this in diverse candidates and also non-diverse candidates. I think as young lawyers, we're told, you know, focus on your area of expertise, become expert at, know everything about, you know, the subject that you and the area of practice that you practice in. And you're rewarded for that as a younger lawyer. You get to a point though in your career that you have to expand your horizons, and perhaps because of the informal mentoring that happens in law firms and in companies, people don't always put their arm around the diverse candidate to tell them some of the advice that all these panelists have been providing today, which is you need to get in the boat along with your client. You need to learn their business. You need to think like a business person first. All those pieces of advice don't flow naturally to diverse candidates. And so finding opportunities for mentorship, even if it comes from colleagues and peers, observing who's successful, maybe not even a lawyer, but who's viewed as high potential and successful, and what is it about them that makes them high potential and successful. And I bet a common observation would be that person's willing to share what they're thinking, and that person acts like an owner of the business on projects that may not even be in their area. They get invested and engaged. And so I have seen careers kind of stall, if you will, because you fall back on being the expert in a narrow subject instead of being broad. The other thing I would say, that a sense of humor can be really helpful. And I see people who are newer, younger in their career, less experienced, because they want to be taken seriously, because they want to be the expert in a particular subject. They forget that first and foremost, everybody you work with, we're all people, and being able to laugh at yourself and have a sense of humor about the strange things that have happened this year or in the moment can be really helpful in terms of signaling and bonding yourself to the people that you're working with projects on. So those are a couple of observations I would have for an offer for folks who are wondering why not, what else do I need to do to advance.
Great, thank you.
So Michael, to amplify something that Ann said that's really great, I just had a conversation with a mentee recently about also being willing to embrace risk a little bit more. Because I think for diverse candidates, one of the things I consistently hear is, I don't want to do that because I might not do it well, and then people will not promote me anymore. And given that the law in general is a relationship business, and in corporations, your relationship capital is what you're trading on, and how well your clients want to work with you, give you credibility, want to see you succeed. You have to take some risks, and you can be open and candid about the fact that it's a novel risk, but then use your network to find the skills and benchmark and get the confidence and shore up that risk aversion. Because a lot of what I also hear about diverse candidates is, I don't know, Vanessa, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think she's really, comfortable with or ready to make the hard choices or make the hard decisions. And so I think it's really important too for us to continue to give them the courage and the bravery and the motivation to fly off, as Ann says, jump first and grow wings on the way down. Because I think generally a lot of times that because of the environments that they're in, there is a risk aversion to wanting to take the big leap that will ultimately position you for a promotion.
I just want to say that's a great insight, and thank you for saying that. I think it's not something I thought of in those terms before, but it's really good advice.
Yeah, and Vanessa, I would echo that. I think it's a great point, because we often hear from women and minorities, look, I just feel like I have to be so much better than everyone else to get ahead, and if you translate that into that means I'm too afraid to make a mistake. Actually, the opposite happens, right? We can't succeed if we're too afraid to make a mistake, right? I always call myself a recovering perfectionist control freak, right? I'm in recovery because I know, and this job tells me every single day, like, stop it. It's a sickness. You cannot be perfect. You cannot be in control of everything. And so that's to think that the way that you're going to get promoted is to not make a mistake. That is that holds people back. So I, like David, really appreciate your saying that.
Great. All right, Vanessa, what can outside counsel do during these uncertain times to provide more value to their clients and legal departments?
Well, we've been really pleasantly surprised with our outside counsel and the law firms with how proactive they have been during the pandemic in general, but just for us during any economic downturn. They have been early partners, and I think a handful of things have really stood out for me, as well as the team members that we have. We have about 100 people in the law department in varying capacities and substantive areas. And just knowing that the law firms are giving us cutting edge development opportunities to have us partner with them on a project, that they're sending us information that's relevant to our day jobs as soon as it comes out, and they're synthesizing it more than the client alerts, but really tailoring it to our business and how it might affect us. Being willing to, during these very travel restricted times, to do Teams, CLE, and webinars that are really interactive and have breakout rooms and breakout sessions, which I know is a lot of time for them. That's a huge time commitment for them when they've also experienced an economic downturn in many instances. Many of them have been willing in this particular climate to look at AFAs, alternative fee arrangements, and pricing flexibility for us. We have been essential and open like so many other companies, so we haven't really been closed ever because we're a freight railroad. But knowing that although we are open, we have been really obviously affected adversely by our customers reducing the amount that they were shipping because they were shut down. Having our firms talk to us about proactive invoice flexibility, price arrangements has been really very welcome. In some instances, we led that conversation, but it was really rewarding to hear them raise their hand and say, hey, we know you guys are open, but we expect you've been adversely affected, and we'd like to talk to you about how we can help. Their continued focus on succession planning, as many of their clients are shut down or have been shuttering. Some of our law firms have also been becoming more lean and laying people off over the last 7 or 8 months. But knowing that they're calling us and giving us an update on what's happening and how they're going to continue to be a great resource, suggesting maybe that we could facilitate, if we have an opening, taking some of those folks in-house, and just being very candid about that. I think was fairly courageous on their part to open that door for either secondments or a transition. And, you know, really two of the things that have gone, I think we embraced them, but upon reflection, really appreciated them more than we articulated to the firms. Number one, it was introductions to similarly situated companies in the law department. This has been a great opportunity for our law firms to say, you know, so-and-so is also a critical infrastructure and is open, and they're having difficulty with deciphering the local and state orders. They're having difficulty getting their hands on PPE. They're having difficulties revamping their insurance and looking at coverage. You guys might want to talk, you know, their general counsel and you might want to connect, or their, you know, insurance team and risk management team may want to connect. So making those introductions of similarly situated clients has been really beneficial for us from a benchmarking perspective, but to also just strengthen our tie to the law firm. And the second thing I'll say that they've done is just being willing, quite frankly, to help us be more strategic. In the downtime, we had historically done our strategic planning, and then we would tell firms and our vendors what we were planning to do. And I think because they are seeing what other companies are, how they're pivoting, how they're changing their vendor management programs, software and technology they're implementing and automating because of remote work, they have come to us to say, let's be a thought leadership partner with you on strategic planning. And let us, you know, help kind of fashion where are you trying to go in the next year. So all of those things have been really helpful. And I think during the pandemic and what's going to be a very uncertain time just in corporate America over the next several months, pandemic alone, political landscape, environmental landscape, knowing that they have those kinds of proactive partnership philosophies to be a good long-term supplier to us has been really helpful. And they're just nice enough to call in every now and then to check in. So we do the same thing, but it's nice also just to say hi and not have every conversation be about business. So all of those things have been really a welcome byproduct of the pandemic.
Thank you, Vanessa. What about you, David? What are your thoughts on maximizing the value that outside counsel brings to the table?
Well, our team does that in so many ways, but I think the biggest thing we've done over the last few years is we've been experimenting with a different model where we have, for a select group of firms that we work with a lot all around the world, offered a fixed fee retainer model for basically all we can eat. That breaks a lot of firms when compensation models when you first broach it, but for the firms that understand that that means you can have your folks work at a much deeper, more strategic level without the sort of time billing, overlay that can really impede, sort of is almost incentivizes inefficiency. If you can get them beyond that, you can really create some much more strategic relationships with firms. We're not perfect at this, and we're still iterating the program, among other things, by now creating some financial incentives to make sure that people doing our work are diverse and that the people who are leading teams are diverse. And we're experimenting with those models as well. But overall, I think we've been pretty pleased with that model, because it, for the firms that get it, they realize it's a way of really creating some relationships that would be much harder to build long term in a billing model. And they realize too that although there's risk on both sides, if they're doing a good job, they're going to attract more share of our work. And then we'll have a different negotiation the next year as to what the right retainer amount should be. But so we're playing with it, but it is I'm really pleased with the early returns on that. Not everybody can do it. Small firms doesn't work. Small companies it might not work, but when you have lots of firms with multi-million-dollar bills every year, we're in a fortunate position to be able to experiment with some models like that.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you, David. All right, terrific. Really enjoyed the panel this evening. Special thanks to our panelists, Amy, Ann, Rena, David, Vanessa, and Debbie. So thank you so much for your time on a Friday afternoon before the weekend. Hope you all have a great weekend.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.